on 9300 1515. Until midday, this is Mornings with Gary Adshead.
Welcome back. If you hadn't heard about it, there was a terrible crash involving a truck and cars over east in Wodonga on Thursday morning. Unfortunately, a 4-year-old boy and 2 women aged 67 and 33 were killed when their cars were crushed by the trailer. The trailer had broken away from the cab, and needless to say that has led to a major inquiry. But it's also led to BP, whose tanker it was, recalling their BP tanker fleet of vehicles around the country to assess whether there is some kind of fault as this investigation gets underway. The TWU, the Transport Workers Union, have been talking about the issues affecting their drivers a lot lately, and they're saying that this is another example of where there needs to be an overhaul in terms of the way these drivers are going about their jobs and the sort of pressures they're under. All right, Michael Kane is from the Transport Workers Union, and he joins me on the line now. Thanks for your time, Michael.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, the question really is, any idea how this could possibly happen? It must be extremely unusual.
Oh, look, it's an absolute tragedy, and of course the thoughts of all Australians really are with those families and communities today and yesterday hit by this news. It is unusual, but this is an industry under pressure, and it's being squeezed by these major economic interests, major fuel companies and major retailers like Coles. They're squeezing every last dollar out of the transport companies they use to carry such dangerous freight, and something's got to give. And this comes only 10 months after another tragedy in Mona Vale. 2 other people lost their lives, one from Western Australia. So it really is a tragedy, and that's why we've taken the decision that we are going to apply for an order in the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, which has the power to deal with these economic interests to make sure that they're using that economic clout for good and not just and chasing the dollar, and this is the result.
I mean, obviously BP are taking it very seriously if they've recalled their entire Australian truck fleet. Can I ask you how does this play out if you take all those trucks off the road for inspections? Who makes up the shortfall? How do they deliver the fuel?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's something I suspect we're going to find out in the next couple of days. It is a good decision of BP to ground their fleet, no doubt about it. But Gary, we sent a letter to BP on the 26th of May this year. We had serious concerns about some of the operations in Perth and in Western Australia, and they wrote back to us and said that they declined our invitation to speak with them and sit down and try and work it out.
Can you tell me what they are? What sort of concerns?
Well, we had concerns about drivers essentially being way too fatigued to perform the task. Now, BP wrote back and said no, they operate safely, but importantly, they refused to even talk about it, and that's a real concern. And that's, if we're not going to get that kind of cooperation that's needed to make change, that leaves us in a position where we simply have to take action, and that's what we're going to do.
Oh, this is an understatement, but driving a fuel tanker would be a very dangerous occupation. What sort of pressures are on drivers these days, more so now than in the past, for example?
Well, more so now we've got this concentration of power, of economic power, so there's a very few very large companies in control of the industry, and that means they can call the shots, and they can call the shots about how the fuel is delivered, how quickly it's delivered, what the deadlines are, and they can call the shots in terms of the economics, what they pay for the contracts to have the work done. And that's a deadly recipe, and it's turning out to be a deadly recipe, because what happens is ultimately drivers no longer have the confidence to put their hand up when they see a maintenance problem, because they're concerned about their work. They're concerned about the contract that their employer has drying up or being sent somewhere else. And that's something that just has to change. We've got to get to a situation where these companies are paying their fair share, they've got appropriate auditing in place for their vehicles, and that means that the drivers can have confidence, can be rested, and have the ability to speak up when something goes wrong.
Given the deaths of these people after this accident, there will clearly be a thorough investigation. Are you calling for something a bit broader, though?
Oh, absolutely we are. The Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal was put in place by the Gillard government in 2012 after 2 decades of evidence said that to make real change across the transport industry, you have to make sure that those at the very top of these transport chains, the likes of the retailers like Coles, the fuel companies, you've got to make sure that they are taking appropriate steps because they're the ones that call the shots. And this tribunal's empowered to do that, and we're making an application to ask the tribunal to act in that way in this fuel sector because, as you rightly said, and as we have a community and families in mourning, there is no second chance as against these types of vehicles. When it goes wrong, it goes fatally wrong.
Now, it is, you said at the start, a very unusual circumstance for the actual tanker to become unshackled from the truck itself, the cab itself. Is it likely to be, or is there any chance that this is human error?
Look, it's difficult to tell, and the investigation will bear that out. But as I mentioned, it comes barely 10 months after another incident, another mechanical failure at Mona Vale where 2 people were killed. And this is an indication to us, and all the signals coming from drivers from the industry are that they are under pressure. Industry research tells us that 1 in 4 tanker drivers say that they feel pressure to speed, and 1 in 3 tanker drivers say that they feel reluctant to raise maintenance issues because they're worried about either their job directly or the contractual implications for their company. And that type of pressure only comes from the very top, and it's that very pressure that has to be addressed, we think, because what needs to happen is before the driver gets behind the wheel, we've got to make sure the truck's properly maintained and that money's flowing down the chain so the driver's properly rested, properly trained, and has the confidence to speak up. And Tribunal has the capacity to do that, and we'll be calling on fuel companies and large retailers like Coles to support that application so we can make real change.
Have you got any idea yet what happens with your members while this recall and inspections are underway?
Look, we're still, to be honest, trying to get our heads around all of that detail. This is a drastic step, but we support the step of grounding the fleet. We think that you just simply cannot take the chance that there's something systemic wrong here. And, of course, I just mentioned, we noted earlier in the year with BP that we had some concerns, and we think it's important that they've grounded the fleet. And now we call on them to support this application and make some real change.
I'm just thinking about some of the things you've said. Motorists might well now be, or if they're not already, nervous about seeing a fuel tanker of any description coming towards them, knowing that you're saying that there are drivers out there that perhaps are under such pressure they shouldn't be behind the wheel.
Well, what every Australian motorist wants, they look in that rear vision mirror and see a heavy vehicle behind them. They want to have the confidence, and they deserve to have the confidence that the vehicle's well maintained, that enough money is flowing down the chain so that the driver's rested, they're not under unrealistic deadlines, they've got the confidence to speak out when there's a problem. That's what the Australian community deserves. And, of course, incidents like this keep reminding us that it's not what the community has at the moment, and so we need to take action, and that's part of why we're taking this action.
Well, just finally, have you spoken to the driver concerned? Has your union spoken to the driver concerned? Have you got any idea how he's going through this?
Not yet, we haven't, but we know that drivers in similar situations, of course, are terribly traumatised because one can't imagine the emotion and the devastation, particularly in these circumstances. And again, our condolences go out where you have a 4-year-old's life that's been extinguished so drastically and suddenly. And of course, the real question here is what are the pressures? What are the pressures that we need to address, because we simply can't allow this carnage to continue.
Thanks for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure, Gary.
Michael Caine, the Acting National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union.